Thank you. I'm really grateful to have had the opportunity to work with and for so many people who embrace cultural resources and saw cultural resources as fully part of the NPS mission. Also, there are people sitting at the table here with me whose work it is that I am receiving credit for, and so it's impossible in this presentation to cover the 30 years and the spectacular resources that we have in these parks, and to thank so many people and cooperators who work with us, and tribes being so interested in cooperating with us to understand these resources. So let's see. Leave me out again. Okay. So these projects, some of them were mentioned in the nomination, and I thought I would just briefly go over them. And I kind of wanted to highlight them because not only I think that they did contribute a lot to our knowledge of prehistory, but they also we barely scratched the surface, and we really need to do more. And we are doing more. Thankfully, depending on Cultural Resource Preservation Program funding, which is so essential for us doing our work here in Alaska. It's just been critical. And we thank the agency and the Washington office for this program. Karen did say I could take as long as I wanted to cover 30 years, but don't be scared. I'm just going to stop. and I think, what I don't get done, perhaps, Karen, you would consider having a webinar by some of the people directly involved in this research still to really do justice to these projects.
Oh, absolutely. We could do a whole series devoted to Alaska.
That would be wonderful. There's just amazing stuff happening here. So Bering Land Bridge is here.
Okay, so now, Jeanne, you have to share your laptop with us. So you go up to content in the corner. Do you see that?
Yeah.
Okay, so you want to click on that.
Click on share.
Do I click on the September 11th PowerPoint? Or
no, you want to click on share and then share your desktop.
Selected area or all? All?
All? All looks like it was the right answer. Okay, so, yep. Now you want to click on from beginning.
I did. Doing something. Oh, here we go. All right.
All right, I think you're away.
And you can see the cursor?
Yes.
And you can hear me okay?
Yes.
Super.
Thank you.
All right. The first project we'll discuss is up here in the northern part of the Seward Peninsula, Alaska. Then next we'll jump to Katmai and Lake Clark, and we might make it to Bristol Bay here, the Walrus Islands Game Sanctuary, and probably this will defer some things, just depending upon how we're hanging in there. I, too, read up on John Cotter just to see who he was, and this quote from him sort of represents how I feel as well as I look back over the wonderful experiences that I had. So, first project, I'm just starting with the good old days. This is where my love affair with NPS, the parks, and the mission and the resources started in 1985 when I was hired to lead an archaeological survey in this land. And directly from this survey led to about 9 years of various assorted research projects that built upon what we learned here in this project, including my own dissertation that I'm going to talk a little bit about. The 2.7 million acre preserve was set aside not for scenic wonders, but for the scientific value of this place as preserving a remnant of the Bering land bridge. The unit was established for science, which just excites the heck out of me. I think that was just a brilliant thing to do. And the designation, in part, was an outgrowth of geologist Dave Hopkins' prior work in studying the land bridge and working in this very area. He imparted knowledge to the park planners in the 70s and was instrumental in getting this unit established. So this is our part of our 96 crew: Dale Vinson, Jim Jordan, Kim Ningieluk from Shishmaref, and Owen Mason off screen. But Dave Hopkins joined us this year for 2 weeks in the field, and he hadn't been out there for health reasons for 20 or more years, and this 2-week stint got him back involved, and he recruited a number of scientists and graduate students who then spent the next several years studying various aspects of the paleoecology of the area. It's really pretty productive. Back in these days, like call them the good old days, there were no radio repeaters, no radios, no sat phones, no way out, except every 2 weeks we had a scheduled camp move, and hopefully a plane would come from Nome or the Fire Pro helicopter would come and move our camp, weather permitting. And so I carried around a little ammo can with an IV bag and some emergency medical supplies because there would be no one to come if someone did got into trouble. So health, life, and safety were important elements of our job competency, but they didn't override the main focus of learning about the resource. We had a lot of some previous archaeological work in the area, and a great deal of ethno-historical data compiled by a couple of very obsessive ethnographers, Dorothy Jean Ray and Tiger Birch, who worked in the area, but also Gideon Paluk-Barr, who was born in a remote part of the preserve, Cape Espenberg, worked with us very closely. And he had also worked with Hopkins in the 40s and was his boat operator then. And Dave told me if I had been born in Shishmaref, I'd be a man very much like Gideon. Gideon was very interested in everything we were doing and imparted a lot of knowledge. This is the site Ublason where Gideon lived as a young boy, and he worked with historical architect Jim Creech to do the first detailed documentation of native architecture in the state. This is Charlie Lucier, who excavated at Trail Creek Caves, which is in the preserve, and it's one of the few early Holocene sites up there, 10,000 years or so old. And this is Dave Hopkins. And we brought Charlie out to help us identify which caves had been tested, what chambers were excavated, and so forth. And there are some pretty good secrets there. This is a screen left from Helge Larsson's 1950 excavation there, so that's part of the site now, too. We found trowels and all kinds of chocolate tins and so forth, but I better move on. So there are many features that make Bering Land Bridge, or Bella, I'll refer to it in the future, an outstanding, unique, and wondrous place. This is a false color aerial photograph of part of the preserve. You can see the thaw lakes that form in the permafrost. They intersect and melt, leaving these craters. And these are volcanic maar lakes. You don't often think of the Seward Peninsula in association with volcanics, but this area has 5 small shield volcanoes, 5 large maar lakes, which are water-filled rimless craters formed by steam-rich eruptions through the permafrost. So various eruptions in the past have deposited tephuras over an area of 1,000 square kilometers here. The most recent eruption formed the North Devil Mountain Lake that occurred about 10,000 years ago. There's also a very extensive lava flow called the Lostium Flow, named by Dave Hopkins, on the Amalik Plateau that occurred 2,000 years ago, and it's recorded in local legends. There he is, the man himself, one of these eruptions that I just mentioned occurred about 17,000 years ago and dumped about 3 meters of ash instantly across the landscape. So what you see here that's being eroded out along the shores of the Salt Lakes that you saw is a 17,000-year-old vegetated surface, and the snow that was on that surface that never melted. It is the coolest thing. And in this surface, and some of Dave's and his colleagues' students did analyze this. They find microtein scads, insects, and so forth, but it's tufted vegetation at the coldest part of the last glacial period. This is the refugium, and directly addresses, was it an Arctic desert? Was it a polar desert or an Arctic steppe? I remember, though, Dave thinking as he was looking at it, he said, seems like a mammoth would have a hard time making a living here. And I do believe that researchers at UAF are very interested in pursuing this, because this is a unique resource that definitely is threatened by global warming. The melting of these lakes is going to go fast, and as far as I know, nowhere else in the world can you do an actual vegetation plot of something 17,000 years old. That's really cool. But anyway, I better move on. So on our survey, we mapped hundreds, 493 house pits to be exact, and this is an aerial shot of Cape Espenberg. The coast of Bering land bridge is eroding mostly. Huge just chunks of land and sites just calving off onto the beach because they sit on permafrost. But in this area, the land is actually accreting, and you see ridges formed through time, and then swales in between. It's a really fragile ecosystem, too, and it's held up totally by permafrost. It's an important bird nesting area, and so this, too, is threatened by melting of the permafrost. But you see the little dimples on the ridges, and these are outlines of late prehistoric house depressions. And there are earlier depressions on the older ridges that aren't in this slide. One thing about, and just to show you what these look like when they're mapped, generally there's a large main room for the house, a long entry tunnel, and then various side rooms off the main tunnel. Sometimes a storm shed at the entryway of the tunnel is shared by houses. But the cool thing about this area is it's treeless. You can see things. You can actually sort of get a general idea about features, not having to excavate those. And, of course, on this survey, we were moving fast and we couldn't excavate. So we have a few radiocarbon dates that we were able to get by limited testing or pull out of, exposures, natural exposures, and that sort of thing. So that type of house, semi-subterranean house with an storm shed entryway, was used into the early 20th century. So there's tremendous cultural continuity here. So some of the later research that stemmed from this survey was based on ethnographic work done by two people. Dorothy Jean Ray studied the Seward Peninsula, and Tiger Birch studied the Kotzebue Sound area, and they were interviewing people in the 60s who were elders, who were, remembering what their parents told them, and so periods into the 1800s where they reconstructed these tribes, as Dorothy called them, or nations, as Birch called them, that were in existence in the 19th century, in the 1800s. And they described 6 to 7 Inupiaq and 4 Yupik societies that were thought to have inhabited the area. And here's where their research overlapped, and of course they disagreed. Dorothy Jean felt that this area with Cape Espenberg belonged to the Topkamiut, and Tiger Birch put them with these Kotzebue Sound Maliniut speakers. So what they said about these 19th century societies were that they were characterized by a distinct group name, a discrete territory, a distinct dialect, subdialect, high level of endogamy, a distinct seasonal round, and a material culture distinct in some detail of structure or ornamentation. Now, most of these things aren't accessible to us as archaeologists, a few hundred years later, because they're not preserved, of course, in the archaeological records. And the existence of these societies had never been documented materially, and so I spoke to the challenge of doing that. So what I decided to do was analyze settlement patterns and look for material culture patterns that would provide insight into these societies, and I focused on the late prehistoric period from AD 1500 to 1850. I wanted to see if we could see these societies in the late prehistoric archaeological record that we had recorded on our survey. And so I chose to focus on two of the 19th century societies' characteristics, evidence of discrete territories and material culture differences that would be manifested by distinct house types. How you build your house is the cultural template, I believe. And remember, I was using mostly survey data with little excavation data. But the archaeological record here is dominated by late prehistoric winter settlements, like I showed you in the previous slide. And as Birch said, the 19th century Inupiaq societies maintained territory centered on a drainage system of major rivers, and during winter, when warfare and raiding were common, virtually all of a society members could be found within their own territory, at settlements located near the core of the territory relative to fishing inland and sealing at the coast. Therefore, the known archaeological record, dominated as it is by late prehistoric winter settlements, lends itself well to comparison with these proposed nations. Looking at house form. So it's unknown how long these societies existed before their demise, but the demise began in the late 1830s and was complete by the end of the 19th century. So Gideon's father was born in the 1880s, and so he was a young man, perhaps, and so he was a very good informant. He taught Gideon. Gideon remembers being pulled out of school. He said, just when I was getting interested in learning this stuff, my dad comes in, he taps me on the shoulder, and he says, son, you won't learn how to survive here. You're coming with me. And so Gideon had this lifelong passion to remember traditional techniques and things. I wanted to say, too, that this was a very isolated area, and the first direct European contact was the voyage of Otto von Kotzebue in 1816. And this is a drawing by Louis Chorus, who was on Kotzebue's crew. And it's of Kotzebue Sound natives in this very area that they encountered in 1816. Really briefly, this is my classification of late prehistoric house types based on an excavated house form. They're distinguished by the presence or absence of entryways and storm sheds, the length of the entryways, and the construction materials. And I found very marked distinction between house forms. And maybe that's the subject of another presentation because we need to move on. This is sort of what these house forms may look like. This is an excavated one from Cape Krusenstern. But you can see that they're very labor-intensive. This is a driftwood area that had to be floor planks, wall and ceiling planks, all hand-hewn. And so it's a lot of effort. And why build this way if you can get by with a 5-foot-long tunnel, in the same environment, which we also have in a certain area here associated, I think, with the Maliminute speakers. And so thus, I concluded that we could see some of these cultural, distinct cultures in the house form record there. Anyway, that's a long story, but we're going to move on. A second line of evidence for the occupation of this area by distinct cultural groups is a marked discontinuity in the settlement pattern in the Emmerich lava plateau. As shown here, there's a bunch of atypical sites that I don't think they exist anywhere in the Arctic archaeological record, perhaps because there aren't cinder cones like here, but there are several cinder cones in the area, and in late prehistory, substantial villages with up to 25 houses in one case are on top of these cones. Now, Birch and Ray said that 7 houses in a village constituted a large village, so 25. There are also many other features, storage features and stuff here that indicate something was interesting going on. But they're associated with massive stone monuments. You can see some of them. I'll show you more later. And so, common to all the other coastal interior houses in the study area, except these stone houses on the cinder cones, is immediate proximity to fresh water sources. I concluded these villages were occupied in winter, and remember, winter was when we're raiding and warfare. They're very defensible positions, and you can also defend your stores. Instead of traveling by dog team to get your stored and cached meat, you had it right there with you, unavailable to raiders. So here's some of the examples of the monumental architecture that co-occurs with these cinder cone villages. And these happen to be at a place called Twin Calderas on Coositron Lake. And they're probably territorial symbols. You can see the edge of the caldera here. These calderas make a nice natural reindeer or caribou corral, and I'm sure that they were used for that. So anyway, you get the idea, these well-built monumental structures, and this is where 4 of those nations' territory boundaries converged. It's a very rich resource area, and we documented that archeologically. Ray states that the Koyuk River people to the east aggressively coveted this area, which was likewise aggressively defended by the occupants, as Coositron Lake was the headwaters of the west-flowing Coositron River, an extremely important place for fish and caribou procurement. And this is where the monuments are the most concentrated and elaborate. And then a few years ago, Mike Holt, the archaeologist for the Northwest Park, asked me to help him visit these sites we recorded in '85 for condition assessments and better mapping. And we were coming down the slope of the caldera late one night. It was raining, we were cold and wet, and it was dark. And I just froze in my tracks because I saw a cairn that was in human form, and we didn't see that in '85. Went back the next day to record it in the sunlight. You see its head, here's its arm, here's another arm, here's the body cavity. It's looking at us. And it was such I can't tell you what a powerful image it was. And a little ways away from it is a large triangular slab that's in a mound that's been placed upright. They both point to the east. Remember the direction of the invaders. Anyway, cairns in human likeness have not been recorded from the Western Arctic. They're common in the Canadian Arctic, but not here. So there's a story to be told here, and there's definitely a National Historic Landmark District nomination to be written. It's just way cool. So what time is it? Ooh. So we're going to go to Katmai next and look at some research there. Are you guys? Okay. We worked for 4 seasons on a little island on the bordering Shelikof Strait, and we named the island Mink Island because of all the little weasels that are running around looking at us every day and playing on our tents at night and running under the tent floor. And anyway, so we gave it sort of that name. We undertook testing here at this site as opposed to all of the other eroding sites along this coast because it clearly is a yardstick site with a rare long-term and nearly continuous occupation in a very rich bay. Professor Don Dumond recorded this site with his fellow University of Oregon archaeologists back in the 60s. And he came out with me in '96, and we looked around and saw artifacts sort of scattered around the surface that displayed pretty much every cultural period that had been, found in the region, and said, yeah, we probably should do something about this. Here's where the site is. And I think I have another slide, but the task was huge, and so what we did was just focus on the part that I knew would be lost within the next 5 years, about a 3x6 excavation area. And here's a little bit of explanation of the site. There are 2 middens at the site, the lower midden, which is 7,000 to 4,000 years old, and then all of this, except for a meter of sterile sand, is shell, deposited from 2,000 years to 500 years ago when the site was abandoned. You can see some late prehistoric house depressions here, but this whole spine, this is all people. People built this. And so when people occupied this, the sea level was a bit lower, but also they had an unobstructed view of the whole bay. This was not there. There are also burials, and the dates for the burials are here. And these were eroding from this younger component scattered down the slope. And several had been collected in the 60s. So a part of our work, too, and our reason to be there was that this site was being vandalized, and there were concerns. So we worked very closely with the Council of Katmai descendants on that. I guess just in the region, and I lost my cursor. Here's the study area. Anchorage is up in here, so you get there either by plane from Kodiak, boat from Homer, something like that to work. But move on. So our work at Mink Island led directly to Becky Salibi writing an NHL nomination for Amalik Bay. The Tockley Island group here had long been listed on the National Register as an archeological district, but we were able to expand the recognition. Can I move on?
Where's Mink Island?
Can I go back?
Back here.
Oh, Mink Island is right here.
Jeanne, take your time.
You've
got time.
Almost noon.
Well, don't cut into your lunch, whatever you do.
I don't have one, but anyway. Okay, but please just tell me, you guys, when you've had enough. Okay, so anyway, there's Mink Island. You can see from this, this is a hugely dynamic area, and sea level has changed relative to the former occupations. But tsunamis generated by earthquakes and volcanic eruptions, high waves and winds from winter storms are really taking big bites out of these cookies. And just to characterize, this is one of the most tectonically active regions on Earth. With a great earthquake, which is defined as a greater than 7.8 magnitude, occurs once a century, and a giant earthquake, like the '64 quake, occurring once every several hundred or several thousand years. Fall and winter storms are severe, with northwest winds prevailing. In June, they strike the site from the left, and then winter storms from the south or southeast are traveled across the open ocean, striking the site. The tidal range is 9 meters, the highest in the winter months, so combined with those winds, it's very damaging to the site. So the fact that there was something left is pretty phenomenal, and the degree, the phenomenal preservation at this site is also pretty astounding. It's only because big bites come out of the edges, but what's left has been pretty much unaltered. It's just amazing. I'll show you some of those slides really quickly. Let's see. A lot of the site is now in a lag deposit because of sea level changes, and this is a big blade core that was found in the lag deposit, and it would fit very nicely in the Anangula assemblage, and that site dates in the Aleutian Islands to between 11,000 and 12,000 years. And these are our first people on Mink Island. We have more than 90 radiocarbon dates from the site, and I took the medians and some major occupations and lined them up with this graph of mean summer temperatures reconstructed for Alaska, so you could see major climatic events relative to the establishment of camps and dwellings on this island. our occupation starts just at the the end of the hypsothermal as temperatures are cooling. See, I do have some information about the temperature change, but there's a spike, a warm spike that happens to co-occur, and I know this is sort of a superficial overlay, but we have a massive occupation. It is a winter house. It's got huge post holes and was used year after year because of the the laminated floor that this had. And then we don't have another major occupation during this cold period. And during this area, the site is abandoned. However, Amalik Bay is not abandoned. There are sites elsewhere, but this particular site gets abandoned for a couple thousand years. People come back during the medieval warm period and then leave again at the start of the Little Ice Age. Let's see. In the interest of learning the possible effects of old driftwood, there are no trees, and so there's a huge bank of driftwood on these sites. So wanting to see how this would affect our radiocarbon dates, we identified the wood, and then I looked at hardwood, which would be the local shrubs of birch and alder and willow, versus conifers, which have to come in because they still don't grow there, although they're getting there. It's just taken a long time. And so I basically, there really isn't much of a difference that I could find. We have got cataloged about 36,000 artifacts, and this is sort of a distribution of some of the major artifact types, red being blades. These are big blades. They actually never disappear throughout the entire sequence. It's kind of interesting. And chipstone tool technology, but purple is when ground slate comes in about 5,400 years ago, which is quite a bit earlier than we originally thought. And it kind of tends to dominate the tool industry after that. I think we have identified a little over 12,000 shell, and our shell has been used for specific isotopic studies later. We've got a species diversity of 25 different shells having been collected and by occupants in the lower midden, and 18 in the upper midden. The species found most consistently in the excavation are still present in the intertidal area of the site today. However, cockles, soft-shell clam, razor clam, and surf clam are not found at the site today, but are nearby in more sheltered and soft substrates. We have a number of people have helped identify fish and bird and sea mammal bone from the site. At least 250,000 of these have been. It's a huge undertaking for such a small excavation area, really. But I wanted to point out this kind of preservation that we have. This is a 5,000-year-old fish pressed into this floor, and this is the nature of these deposits. I should get away from these charts and show you the floors. Since you don't have trees, you don't have root disturbance, we didn't have ice, frost jacking of things, all the artifacts are neatly and flatly lying on these beautifully color-coded floors. So this is our 7,200-year-old floor. The first people to come to Mink Island and see it in the profile. I mean, that's like 2 millimeters thick, but it's neat. And then, so these pins mark that floor. The piece of it that we have, of course, has been ripped and torn away, and you can see by this, the nature of these sediments, that they were, some turbulence deposited them on top of this floor. Here are 2 ochre grinding stones in the middle of the floor, some floor structure feature that I don't understand, and over here we had a subfloor house pit that yielded a boat-shaped lamp that, along with a lamp found in Kodiak, might be the oldest 2 lamps found in North America. And ours maybe has a 100-year edge on it, but you know how radiocarbon is. So the other thing that's left undone is these tools, these Anangula-like blades, are encrusted with residue. And so we carefully collected these in foil, and they're still in foil in the curatorial hoping for someone to possibly recover DNA. Wouldn't that be cool? But probably unlikely. But and also other information from this residue. And here's the lamp kind of cleaned up so you can see what a beauty it is. This is another occupation that is on top of that turbulence that I showed you before. And it's coincident with the end of that warm period or the hypothermal interval on the chart earlier. It's the next major occupation directly on top of a 10-centimeter thick volcanic ash that fell on the site around 6,600 years ago. There was no soil development on it. These things were pressed right, this floor was pressed right into the ash. So, and there's evidence of similar sites in Kodiak. So while this event, was somewhat big, people didn't stay away. They came right back. They were carving expedient net floats out of pumice and harvesting sea lions. There's a sea lion rookery about 3 miles away that we could even hear on quiet days when we were excavating, and people were definitely hunting there throughout the period of occupation. So what else to say about that? It's pretty cool. This is that winter occupation that I mentioned, that this black floor. We sort of unimaginatively named it the Big Black Floor. That's how it is now in all notes. But it was, and we were filthy from working in it. But it's this laminated. Here's a structural feature. Let's see. This dates to about 6,000 BP. And there's a large, it's just off screen, but a large pebble-filled hearth that heated the place. Lots of stone lamps here. I'm just going to move on. So there was a brief cold period, about a 2.5 centigrade drop in mean summer temperature after that last occupation, followed by this beautiful floor, also totally covered in red ochre. This is a timber that fell, and it's actually only like 1 millimeter thick, but it was just so beautifully preserved you could brush it and clean it off. And it was pole size, and over here, if you can see my cursor, is the edge of this shallow little shelter that most likely was a tent. And there are other lines of evidence that indicate that too. And there's bone needle manufacture going on. This house is like perfectly untouched except for the big bites taken out of it by, the erosional things. But the actual surface itself was preserved under a very thin tephra fall. And I don't know what else to say. So this cultural occupation at that particular part of the site abruptly ceased about 4,000 years ago, and then 2,000 years ago, the massive midden began forming, and this is one of the occupations in that younger midden. This is a sea lion rib with a broken slate point driven through it that we found. Associated with this occupation, which is 3 meters thick, the shell, are the burial remains. Oh, this is Mike Hilton, and this is a piece of that shell midden. Pretty incredible.
Can I ask you a question before you move on? I'm sorry. When you were talking about earlier how you saw the habitation changes with the climate changes over time. And you also said you saw like 25 different species of clam shells or stuff like that. Did that change over time? Have you done any research to see if that changed over time?
That was one specific question that I did ask Nora Foster, who's the shell expert here in Alaska, to look for, and she kind of basically said, not really. Not seeing any difference. So darn. Yeah. But then Gail Irvine from USGS has spent a lot of time looking at isotopic data in these shells. So we've given her well-dated shells to look at through time. But that's maybe the subject of, but they are finding some really interesting things with the shell. So about the burials, we had the remains of people interred, laid out on driftwood planks that occurred about 900 years ago. Well, calendar corrected, it'd be more like around AD 1450. And they were 2 subadults and 3 small children, aged newborn to 2.5 years. And then later, an older female was buried in a flex position in a pit placed immediately above the previous burial. Council of Katmai descendants excavated these burials with me personally, and then they dictated how they would be stored. Also the elders said that they wanted to learn as much about these people as possible. So subsequently there's been DNA analyses and direct dating on these remains. I do apologize for not having more interesting people photos in this, but this was a sort of a regular crew member, right? And so this is how we left the site, our little 3-by-6 meter excavation cube in 2000. And we covered it with geotextiles, we put sandbags, and we tried to fortify it against the sea. Here's again where our excavation area was. And then this is 2003, 3 years later. It pretty much took out most of what we had excavated, and we had backfilled it. And this is Tim Taylor, who's the erosion control guru at Denali. So I brought him out and just said, I expected him to laugh at me because coming from Bering Land Bridge, I've seen multi-million-dollar seawalls at Shishmaref fail miserably, and they keep rebuilding them, and, water always wins. But he actually said, I think there's something we can do. And he helped us. We had to bring materials from Homer and offload them onto a Zodiac and then carry these gabion baskets up the shore. It's in wilderness, so we used all hand tools. We built little ramps and took wheelbarrows up and took cobbles from the beach, the right size, and built these gabion baskets. We did it in about a week. It was actually fun. It looks horrible, doesn't it? And this is how we left the site. And this is pretty much how it looks now the last time we revisited it. Because really it doesn't take direct hits. It gets run up. This is where the direct hit of the wave hits, and then it's splash and run up. That's continually eating away at the site. So for now, it's working. Well, here we go to Lake Clark, if you're still hanging with me. Ice patch and global warming has, let's see, this is, global warming attached a new discipline of archaeology called ice patch archaeology. These are perennially frozen areas of snow and ice that generally lie on shaded sides of mountains. And caribou and other animals regularly seek to escape insects by retreating to these high patches of snow and ice, and they've done so for thousands of years, and ancient people hunted them there. Since the discovery of thick caribou dung deposits melting from Canadian Yukon ice patches in 1997, and the discovery of arrows and dart shafts, among a host of other rare organic artifacts in this dung, archaeologists over the world have begun to search for these patches to save the rare artifacts they may release as they melt. In 2008, we teamed up with Jim Dixon at the University of New Mexico and the National Science Foundation Polar Program to join this race to search for ice patch sites in Lake Clark in the Dena'ina homeland before they disappeared completely. And here's a couple of remnant ice patches that we found. We finally found some prehistoric organic artifacts, miraculously. antler arrow points melting from two ancient ice patches on a very special place in Dena'ina territory on the flanks of Talakwana Mountain, which is a very commanding and powerful place. It's where a rare mythic Dena'ina place name attaches to this place of time of starvation, a shaman going, tapping on the rock, and the animals coming out. And linguist James Carey sees this as actually an origin myth. Here's George Alexi from the Non-Dalton tribe helping us with our survey. And here is Talakwana Mountain, formidable place. Sorry, can't see the name. But with hanging glaciers. And so these ice patches are right alongside of it. And let me see, where is Talakwana Mountain? Twin Lake, Turquoise Lake, it's up in here. And here it's here, right here. And here is a major historic Dena'ina trail that goes right by these ice patch sites called the Talakwana Trail. And here's some of the scenery from that trail looking up into the flanks of Talakwana Mountain. So we were fortunate to find these arrow points that had just melted from this ancient ice, and the radiocarbon data is shown there, and this is just 4 sides of the same point. This wouldn't have lasted long out in the open. I mean, these disappeared just like that. And then over here in the distance here are 2 other patches where these points were recovered. And these little dots are where Jim drilled out material for the radiocarbon date. This surprised us that we would have a 2,000-year-old point there. And I suggest, based on the continuity and the pattern of use of these out-of-the-way sites and the similarity in the form and function of the artifacts that we found, that these were Dena'ina hunters using these ice patches on the flanks of a very powerful and significant place. Not only 150 years ago, as the one arrow is, but 2,000 years ago. And this is significant for us because in the past we've only been securely able to see Dena'ina in the house depressions left at the Keegan National Historic Landmark. And clearly, you know, those are the same house forms back 900 years, so roughly 1,000 years. So I would argue that Dena'ina were up here using bow and arrow, which is also too early for bow and arrow to have been in this area according to data elsewhere. So it has all kinds of implications. So in August of 2013, Dale Davenport and others joined me, and we went up to survey to see the condition of the patch, see if there were any artifacts, and one patch was completely gone. It's just gone now. However, eroding from the last remaining ancient ice that we know of is caribou dung. And I certainly hope people get in there and figure out to collect from that, because that has all kinds of implications for caribou population research. Okay, now we're transitioning to the coast of Lake Clark, and this is Tuxedni Bay. And it's the location of one of 2 rock painting sites that we know of in the Alaska Regional National Park System, and the site is right over here. This is a granite rock face. There are about 25 figures. A few of them are illustrated here. And we spent several years with geologists and lichenologists and a conservator, not only documenting the site and doing research, but collecting, tracing down collections from 1932 from an excavation at the base of the rock shelter by Frederica de Laguna, and trying to figure out how to preserve these sites. This is just a drawing to show you sort of what the panels look like. This is the location of the other rock art site in Clam Cove at the other end of the coast of Lake Clark. And Jennifer mentioned that Brian Fagan was enlisted to write a book about the prehistory of Alaska. And I did that because, number one, he's written extensively about rock art globally, but also, in my experience, people think prehistoric peoples were rather primitive, and they were all about finding a comfortable place to camp and having some meat. And it's like they lived in complex societies. They were complicated politically and spiritually. And when you approach prehistory through art and these concepts, these amazing drawings of features and their spirit helpers, and I think it gives people an idea, an unspoken idea that, you know, these people were about a lot more than just what they ate, if that makes any sense. So as soon as we got Fagan here, he noticed the alignment of the rock art with the peak behind it. So it's tucked back in here, and over the years, sometimes the beach sand, depending upon winter storms, is high. And we looked at all historic photos to try to reconstruct what was happening with this site and how the images were being degraded. And this is just a drawing of some of the images. Boat. And so basically some of the main actions affecting this site is the formation of this black crust. It falls, pops off, and takes the painting with it. And then water runoff here. There's also major cracks and vegetation forming. I'm not sure what my next slide is. Oh, this is the 1969 excavation of everything around the rock shelter. So, and Joan Townsend did this in 1969, and we tracked down her collection and ran a radiocarbon date, and an associated date is 1,700 years. But that doesn't necessarily mean the paintings were painted then. Fagan's conclusion was that these were ritual sites. These weren't just graffiti places anybody could write on. That shamans and powerful people gathered there before hunts. You notice the big boats, and they figure prominently in both for rituals to ensure a successful safe hunt. This is, again, with the naked eye, the pictograph, the paintings. This is an enhanced, no, I think that's coming up next. But you can see how complicated these are, and you can't, it's very difficult to see. Here you go. With the fine imagery that we acquired for the site, we're able to actually see a lot more of what's going on there. Here's Dr. Fagan, here's Karen, and folks in on Dalton, where he met and gave a presentation about this. Probably lots more to say about that, but I want to move on. But this is the book, so this is also in Tuxedni Bay, and I bring this up because we've recently been able to do some testing at a village site on this island called Magnetic Island. It's not an island now, but it was in the past. This occupation is pretty interesting, and it dates, let's see, about 3,500 to 3,800 years old, and it's the oldest dated site on the coast of Lake Clark. And its artifacts suggest that it's Arctic small tool, which is also not recorded from there. This is new. And it's also capped by a thick readout ash that probably led to the abandonment of this area by these people then. And it's, let's see, I think I have so Magnetic Island is here, the pictographs are here, and this is just a map of glaciation. Well, was the pictograph site accessible to these folks? Because a lot of red ochre was found in this site. And it's tempting to me to say, did they have anything to do with this site? But, it's hard to make that connection. But this is the extent of the 12,000-year glaciation over to here. But, so for the last 12,000 years, the site would have been open. The bay would have been open and available for people to travel up the bay. So this bay, too, I want to say, has never had an archaeological survey. And so we do need to do a lot more work in this area. It's pretty cool. So, shall I continue? Okay. All right. Well, now we're going to Bristol Bay. And this is not a national park or preserve. It's a state game sanctuary, but it's a national natural landmark. And their manager at the time had worked in Katmai and knew about Section 106 compliance, and they badly needed a new outhouse. And and so he wanted an archaeological survey. And the state archaeologist, couldn't do it because there was no money. The game refuge would have had to pay their salaries for them to go out and find a place for a new outhouse. And so, I was going to tell a long this sanctuary is just amazingly rich. And it's a haul out for tens of thousands of walrus, and it has been for apparently a long time, which I will show you next. But the village of Togiak on the mainland is very closely associated with this site. They hunted walrus here traditionally, but when the sanctuary was established in 1960, it became off limits for hunting. So they began open boat hunting and losing the walrus, and they couldn't pass on this cultural tradition. But in the 90s, they were again able to hunt here. So in October, they come and hunt there. I was trying to get to a slide that really got me excited about here, this one. So back to needing an inventory. So Judy Alderson, who was head of the NNL program here, sent me this slide, and she said they really need, they want a new outhouse. And I looked at it, and I saw these house depressions. I was like, oh my God. And so what we did was in late May, over a holiday weekend, we volunteered, Judy and I, to take to go have a look and map these sites and then try to find a place that would not disturb. So we did do that, and in the end, we mapped about 105 features. We rerouted trails so they didn't go through house pits, because in the wind there, everything they do is in a house pit because it's out of the wind. So their tent platforms are in house pits. Their burn barrels in a house pit. Because if you go off-site, you get into wet stuff or you get into slopes. But anyway, 105 features, and our oldest radiocarbon date is about 6,000 years old, which is about 3,000 years older than anything we thought existed on the coast in Bristol Bay before. There are interior hunters there quite long ago in the Auckland Mountains, Speen Mountain. Bob Ackerman's recorded sites that are early Holocene sites, and Northern Archaic is there 7,000 years ago. But here on this island, over 20 miles offshore, people didn't have boats, anyway, this is what one of those 2,000 to 2,500-year-old house pits look like. Here's the burn barrel. Behind the burn barrel, walrus, tusk, and skull. Picked up a radiocarbon date there of about 2,300 years. They moved the barrel. They were really, really wanting to protect these resources, and actually, for the little damage that was done, this island, among all the islands in the group, is the only unlooted island. There's wholesale looting going on in this island group. That has been since the 80s when Bob Shaw worked there. So they had this garden that they had excavated in the 70s, a big rectangular garden, and they said, well, we could put the outhouse there because it's already been messed up. So we put in a 1x1. Let's see if it's all messed up. And you can see here, I'm going to trace the messed up part. This has been turned and chilled, and of course it's got artifacts in it because, as it turns out, they took out a Norton house for sure. But underneath here, these densely laminated deposits are intact. And an archaeologist's dream. On the floor, on sterile, is part of a walrus skull, a broken lance point, and at this arrow tip with a big hunk of charcoal, and that's where our 6,000-year-old date came. So we know people were hunting walrus there 6,000 years ago. Pretty cool. We've since gone back and done some more work for additional needs that they had, and have confirmed those dates. Another interesting occupation that is new to us there is Arctic small tool folks being on the island nabbing walrus. 3,000 years ago, and this is a real greasy black. It's a living surface here, and our date of 3,300 years there. And this is a classic Arctic small tool side blade. Oops, I kind of went too soon, but I wanted to say something, and that is, if you remember the previous maps, with lower sea levels, this is not that big of a stretch from Ugashik Narrows, which is near Katmai on the Alaska Peninsula. And Ugashik Narrows is an old site. It's dated to 9,000 or 10,000 years BP. And I think the connections here are here with Round Island, and it's very likely we will find older deposits on Round Island. Another cool thing is that while these people were hunting walrus 6,000 years ago on Round Island, there were still mammoths surviving on the Pribilof Islands, but it was way too far away. Obviously, they wouldn't have survived if they had known about them. And then this was the last area I wanted to talk about, because I didn't want to forget Aniakchak, and there's been a tremendous amount of work done there by Richard Vanderhoek, and based on his discoveries, Brian Hoffman has done data recovery there, and he is finishing his final report right now. But Richard Vanderhoek came up with this graphic. Okay, 3,400 years ago, this is the immediate devastation zone. This is the 1912 Katmai eruption, which we call the largest eruption in the 20th century. This created what Richard calls a dead zone for a long time, and sure enough, we don't see people there for, I think it's about 2,000 years after, maybe 1,800 years after. And this also happens to be a dividing line between different language speakers as people were encountered. So he's been exploring this question for quite a long time, and did his dissertation on it. And I just wanted to put this in so you could see this is sort of the history of Aniakchak. These are all tephras, and that 3,400 BP one is up here. So it's a pretty amazing place, and I would really hope that we could enlist Richard or Hoffman to give an entire webinar on this. And that's it. How bad are we? 11, 12:30. Oh, another Cotter quote. he was kind of the master of understatement from what I read. But I think we will live long enough to see things because of the archaeologists still working. Dale Vinson, Jeff Rasik, Michelle Jesperson, Jennifer Peterson, Weinberger, all of these people who are, and there's many others that I would love to mention, Phoebe Gilbert, but I'm going to be quiet because it's time to stop.
Jeanne, that was a wonderful presentation. Thank you so much. Thank you for sharing all of the field work that you've done over the past 30 years.
Or the little portion, anyway.
Yes. Do people have any questions for Jeanne?
Well, it has certain waterproofing properties, but red ochre's been used. It's found in Africa in sites that are, like 250,000 years old, and it was a paint, so it meant a lot of things. To me, if you cover your entire floor with it, it means something more than just I want a waterproof hide here. I think it means something, a protected space, a meaningful space, as many cultures around the world do.
What do you think the black material was?
Charcoal.
Just charcoal on the floor?
Yeah.
Huh.
Just charcoal.
There's like spread it around?
On their feet. They tracked it all over the place. Because the floor was laminated like a sugar wafer. Thin, couple millimeter thick laminations of black, and then white sand. Just real thin because it's compressed, and it had the overburden of the later occupation built on top of it, so everything's kind of squeezed. So I think they went away, came back, and dust blew in, sand blew in, and so you see. So I think it's cracking because they had these huge pebble hearts. That's full of charcoal. So they probably were smeary looking. Well, I don't know if you heard, Janet was asking if there was a summary of the meaning of the pictographs, and we worked, this is the problem of not being able to name everyone and everything, but we worked closely with Madonna Moss at the University of Oregon, and her graduate student, Melissa Baird, was charged with doing a circumpolar analysis of symbolism in art, any kind of art, and she wrote her dissertation on that, and also published an article in Artist Anthropology. But the symbolism probably represents, like the boats are hunting, and hunting a large whale, not a beluga whale, which is also something interesting to pursue in that area. And also like some images like a shaman image that also occurs, I think, at some Siberian sites with a hole in the stomach. There are transformation images. You see spirits, images. It's just hard to know. We really tried to examine things to see, were these painted over, were they added to, can you see distinct groups where at different periods of time certain symbols may have been added, but we didn't really discern anything like that. But I'll give you those references.
You can't stop. Keep working, right?
There are so many other people, like I started to name them all, and I'll continue if you like, but they are doing incredible things. Yeah. Thank you.
For all your contributions.
Thank you. It was totally fun. That was the fun part.
It's incredible how many really great archaeologists and anthropologists that you've worked with all over the state.
If I could just call out the BIA people, I mean, we have really cool stuff going on, and people in Southeast, Teresa Tebow. I mean, there's just, keep it up, guys.
Jeanne, what are you working on in your retirement?
Well, because archaeology fed my soul as I was manager and managing, and you know how it is with contracting and cooperative agreements and these things. So I'm working now with Jennifer to complete a backlog, for example, to write a professional report of the Mink Island excavations and the Round Island testing for the state. So I have a pile of artifacts that I'm joyfully working on and doing nothing else. That'll take me about a year, I think.
Oh, very good.
Jeanne retired in February, right? And now she's a rehired annuitant for the Park Service.
She must have snuck out.
July.
She must have snuck out because I looked to see if there was an announcement on Inside NPS and I didn't see anything.
Today. She's back, so we're all happy.
Oh, absolutely.
I am scary because I got to tell you, retirement's pretty awesome.